folks who knew somebody in school who would later make the news for being charged with murder. What was that person like? His mom, a teacher at the high school, was hit by a negligent semi-truck driver in front of the school and passed pretty much instantly. 8 years later, he got arrested for hiring someone to hunt down and kill the truck driver. What makes it truly tragic is when he got arrested, he had just won a very messy custody battle for his kid from his incredibly abusive and horrible ex-wife. He was a good kid. He just never quite moved on from what happened. Kinda strange dude, but very quiet and soft-spoken. Good at pencil drawing. About 5 years after high school, he took a kitchen knife in each hand and stabbed his uncle to death. Drove to his girlfriend's house, took a shit in her front yard, forced her into the car, and drove her to another state. Let her go, and turned around and drove back. Asked to use the phone at a gas station, and was told no until the cashier looked up and realized he was absolutely covered in blood. Called the cops, and surrendered. Never saw that one coming. Went to high school with Jimmy Holmes, the Aurora theater shooter. Same graduating class, same circle of friends. He was a typical nerd like the rest of us. Into anime, video games, MTG, Edit, Magic, The Gathering. During lunch in the calc teacher's classroom, he was a bit eccentric, but we all were back then, trying to fit in with other weirdos. I never knew about his mental health illness struggles. It was sobering to see him on the news. It didn't register that it was him at first. He looked like a completely different person, and not just physically. His eyes were the most striking part. You could almost see the mania. They didn't look like that before. Not murder, but manslaughter. He was popular, cocky, well-off, entitled, but really no different than most of the preppy rich kids. He wasn't even really a bully, so much as a jerk. I was not cool nor popular, but I got to know a different side of him as his tutor. Despite his popularity and stunningly good looks, dude could have easily been a model. He was dyslexic and would stutter if he got nervous. He wasn't dumb, but he struggled to learn and covered his insecurity with bravado. Anyway, about a month after his 21st birthday, he got into a bar fight. From all accounts, both he and the victim were equally drunk, equally belligerent, and fighting over the typical stupid shit young drunk men fight over. He caught the other guy with one of those one-in-a-million punches that killed him. Despite having considerable family wealth, he didn't fight it, took responsibility, and pled guilty without a plea deal. He got 7 fixed with 13 indeterminate, got paroled at 10. Note, the victim's family asked parole be denied at the 7YR hearing, had no objection to release at 10. We stayed in touch, and I can say this guy took what he did very seriously, spent his incarceration working on his education and bettering himself, and is now out, staying sober, working, and engaged. Guy named Chris always acted like a tough guy. Wasn't fun to be around at all, just a dickhead at all times. In a bar, he lost a game of pool, ran his mouth to a bunch of guys bigger than him, got the shit beat out of him, came back and shot up the place, killing a couple people. Doing life and probably still a dickhead. She was my childhood bully, and I always thought she was a psychopath. She ended up convincing her boyfriend, a fair partner, to kill her husband, father of her children, while he was on leave, Army, convicted of conspiracy to commit murder. There was a child prodigy in my HS that won tons of awards, entered and succeeded at science fairs, etc. I was in a standard electronics course with him. He was very nice, but I remember he was basically a full-grown man at 15. Dark, heavy beard, signs of a receding hairline, and super built. He was well known for lifting weights. When he was 29, he executed his wife in their driveway. Police later determined she'd been shot 18 times, with 10 of those gunshots to her head. God damn. I know someone who was best friends with Dennis Rader all through childhood, up until he was identified as BTK. Rader is in a fuckload of their childhood photos because they were always at each other's houses growing up. It messed up every member of that immediate family when it became undeniable that Rader was BTK. To say they had no idea would be a massive understatement. It caused its own kind of trauma, trying to acknowledge that these seemingly separate entities were actually the same person, one who they trusted and allowed around their kids. They were also forced to accept that they were with him immediately before or after some of the crimes. Knowing you spent those years terrified of BTK and then realizing he was in your house the whole time is a unique kind of mindfuck. In elementary school, an older, bigger kid who lived a few houses down from me was picking on me one afternoon on the bus ride home. My memory is foggy, but I recall my brother intervened, and the kid, in retaliation, crushed my brother against the seat of the bus until the bus driver stopped him. I always knew him as a bully, stereotypically so too. He was big for his age, aggressive. 20 years or so later, it turned out that he'd murdered his girlfriend's husband, held the man's head in a dog bowl of water until he died, then burned his body in a fire pit on his property. He bragged about it to his friends and eventually was arrested. The police suspected he'd killed others before, buried their bodies on his property or in the state park. In an interview with the local paper, one of the detectives said something to the effect of, "I've investigated violent crimes for 30 years, and this guy's scares me. Popular cheerleader, stereotypical blonde and pretty. Not smart, but not stupid either. Most of her stupidity was an act. She dated a guy who got her into heroin. Her and the BF wanted money for drugs, so they text this other guy who was also in our grade and had been following her around like a lost puppy for years. They drove him to an ATM and made him withdraw all his money at gunpoint, then drove him into the woods, shot him, and left his body there. All for less than $200. Absolutely horrible. She's gonna spend most, if not all, of her life in jail, and rightfully so. Attempted murder. She always had an excuse for why she did bad things. Cheated on tests. She didn't have time to study. Stole money from work. My bills were due. Hit her husband. He was too feminine. Went into so much debt that they lost their home. She deserved nice things. Hired a hitman. Her husband wouldn't give her money for meth. He was cute and nice. I was in band with him, and he worked at the same department store as I did, so he would come visit me in my department on his breaks. He murdered his wife and did that thing where he begged the community for info on the murder and helped the authorities try to find the culprit. Made himself look like the heartbroken spouse of the victim until he was eventually caught and put away for 25 years. My best friend's sister, who had schizophrenia, went off her meds and killed her mother. The family was already reeling from having lost their father. He had developed lung cancer, and when they were doing a biopsy of his lung, the doctor slipped and punctured a vein or something, triggering a heart attack and a stroke. He never recovered from the stroke and died 10 days later. The mother was an invalid that he had been the primary caretaker with the help of their daughter, and while on her meds, she was able to help her mother as needed. But once the father died, there was no one checking if she was taking her meds, and she eventually slid off of them. She became obsessed with the thought that her mother was trying to cut her out of the will or something, and she took a knife to her one day. She tried to cover it up, claiming someone else came in and attacked her, but the evidence was too clear, and her story was very incoherent. It destroyed the entire family. My friend is still broken by the event years later. Within a couple of months, he went from having both of his parents and a loving sister to everyone being effectively gone. She made the news, and was fairly infamous. People still give their house a cold shoulder in the neighborhood. Aspects of my life are pretty hellacious. I live with severe chronic pain and other issues, but I look at what happened to him and tell myself someone always has it worse. Something similar happened to my high school classmate. He seemed fine while I knew him, but developed schizophrenia after high school. Early 20s is a common age of onset. He was being treated and able to live his life. He even got engaged. Then his psychiatrist moved away and dropped the ball, making sure his treatment didn't lapse, while he transitioned to a new doctor. He ended up running out of his medication, despite both he and his family trying to contact both doctors, trying to get more. He started to become agitated, and his dad took him to their house to try to keep him safe and calm. But he began to believe that his dad was an android look-alike that had killed his real parents and was trying to trap him there and kill him. His dad called his mother and fiancée to come help, but he ended up stabbing his father to death with a kitchen knife before they could get there. His family was supportive of him, and he was very close with his dad. I can't imagine coming to the realization that you've killed your own father in a fit of delusion. Just a horrible tragedy for the entire family. Side story. I found out about it when I received a call at work from a reporter. He asked me if I knew classmate and what he was like. I said we went to high school together and was pretty normal. Then joked, "Why? Did he kill someone?" The smartest person in our high school was in an abusive home, and to my understanding, they had a bad trip and killed an abusive parent. They got out later and seemed to be a really good force advocating for the criminal justice system reforms and other good things. Band kid. Super nice. A little reserved. We hung out middle school until he killed his brother when we were 25-ish. It actually happened in our high school parking lot. The details were hazy, but he stabbed him multiple times. It was during the bath salts craze, and it wouldn't surprise me if he was on them. He served minimal jail time, got out, and proceeded to do a bunch of armed robberies. Shit is wild. I went to magnet school in South Florida that was in a pretty bad neighborhood. The first year, we were segregated to our own floor and escorted everywhere. The second year, we weren't as supervised, but still had security around. The third year, we were released to the hounds. I, a tiny white kid, befriended a gigantic black student by making him a few things in woodshop class. He looked out for me and often stood in for me in a fight. I got jumped in the bathroom one day, and while walking back to class, bloody and crying, he saw me walk past his class. He came out and asked me what was up. I pointed to the two kids that jumped me, and he cornered them and got my money, plus some back. Told them to never fuck with me again. The last day of school was an absolute war zone. We literally had SWAT across the street trying to keep the fights to a minimum. My buddy ran with me and other students to the bus to keep our scrawny little white asses from getting killed. Well, about 4 years later, I was watching the news, and he popped up on a wanted segment. He was wanted for murder of 3 people. The 3 people were gang members, but the way he did it caught the public eye. They rolled up on a busy intersection in Miami, and he was across the street with some homies. He walked up to the car and executed the driver, then the passenger in the back. The front passenger got out, but was hit by a car that was getting the hell out of there. He walked around and shot that guy a few times. He then walked back to the homies, handed them the gun, and left. He was caught in Alabama later that year and was shot by the police when stepping out of the house. Edit. Horace Mann Middle, for all of those wondering. Located in lovely El Portal, only a stone's throw from the Pork and Beans projects. Was never charged because he committed suicide immediately after the murders when cornered by police. But my childhood next-door neighbor. They lived behind us in our neighborhood, and when I was 6 and he was 5, We were friends and would play together. I witnessed him receiving his fourth concussion to that point when he ran headfirst into a low fence while trying to catch a football. We moved away when I was 7, but when I turned 17, I saw the news story about him murdering his parents and babysitter. He had a babysitter because, multiple early childhood concussions and brain issues. The cops eventually cornered the babysitter's stolen car he was fleeing in, and he shot himself before he could be apprehended. Hadn't seen the kid in 10 years, but it really fucked me up to think about it when I found out. Added to say that I misremembered some of the details, had to look it up again. He killed the babysitter and a counselor, authority figure of some sort, who was overseeing him. His parents were divorced and out of town when the incident occurred.